In just his second ever NBA game, former Indiana Hoosier Trayce Jackson Davis is already making waves.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. It is the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Goins. I appreciate you making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, former Indiana Hoosier Trayce Jackson Davis is off to a quick start in his young rookie NBA career. He's only played 2 games so far with the Golden State Warriors, but this last game that he played, he was flirting with a double-double. Coming off the bench in 20 minutes for Trayce Jackson Davis. Here was his stat line, okay? 20 minutes played. He went 5 of 9 from the field, 3 of 4 from the free throw line, had 9 total rebounds, 7 of those on the offensive end of the floor, which I don't think surprises any of us who watch Indiana basketball. Had 4 blocks, did have 2 turnovers, did have 2 fouls, but had 13 points. He was 1 rebound shy of getting a double-double in his second ever NBA game. And if you remember, the only other game that he's appeared in, and it's early in the NBA season, but the only other game that he has appeared in was the Warriors' third game of the season when they played, or the second game of the season when they played the Sacramento Kings, when he played 5 minutes, didn't have a shot attempt. He had a rebound and a personal foul, no points scored. So nothing crazy in that game for Trayce Jackson Davis. But this was a game where he got some playing time. The Warriors were in control of this game, you could say, against the New Orleans Pelicans. And he came in and did a lot of similar things that we saw him do when he was in Bloomington, right? When he was playing at Assembly Hall. He was aggressive with the basketball, was Trayce Jackson Davis. He crashed the boards on both sides of the floor. And again, I mentioned those offensive rebound numbers for him. 7 offensive rebounds, man. That's something that if you can do in the NBA, if you just crash the boards in general, man, NBA coaches are going to love you. And especially coaches like Steve Kerr with the Golden State Warriors, who he is a massive just preacher of effort, rebounding, and keeping possessions alive. Because think about who's playing on the Golden State Warriors, right? You have Steph Curry, who likes to shoot threes. Draymond Green, who can shoot threes at times as well. And all of these different guys. Heck, you even got Chris Paul playing on the Warriors right now, which is kind of crazy, I know. But you have guys that like to shoot the 3 ball, which is something Golden State has done this entire time that they have had in their dynasty, right? And when's the best time to shoot a 3? It's off of an offensive rebound, which is why what Trayce Jackson Davis did in this second game of his young NBA career, that's what sticks out to me. 13 points is great. 5 of 9 shooting. That's great. 3 of 4 from the free throw line. I like it from Trayce Jackson Davis. But 9 total rebounds, and you almost get a double-double in just your second ever game playing in the NBA. That is really, really big. And I'm excited for him. I know a lot of you Hoosier fans are excited for him because this is one of the biggest names to come out of Indiana basketball in a long, long time to get to the NBA. We saw the likes of Victor Oladipo, who I actually got to watch Victor Oladipo play a couple of times in the NBA. But the biggest game I ever saw him play was when he was with the Pacers. It was in Cleveland in 2018, okay? And it was the first round of the playoffs in the NBA in 2018. on the road in Cleveland with LeBron, and Victor Oladipo goes off for a 30-point triple-double. It was unbelievable. The Pacers destroyed the Cavs in Cleveland. I had a bunch of my Ohio friends with me, and it was an awesome experience to watch Oladipo do that. And so I think a lot of Indiana fans are there and have high expectations for what Trayce Jackson-Davis could be in the NBA. And when you look at his play style, it's almost, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it's almost the older play style in the NBA, because look at where basketball is going. People shoot threes. Everybody can shoot threes, but that's not really his game, right? That's not his game at all. And so he's going to have to find ways to get on the floor and really do damage in other ways. And getting out and running, getting to the rack, finishing when you get there, drawing fouls, hitting your free throws, grabbing rebounds on both ends, and just high levels of effort, something that he did his entire time in Indiana and something that in 2 games he's already done. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis can be a really good player in the NBA. I really do. And I'm excited that he got this opportunity. I hope he continues to get more with the Golden State Warriors, and I think he absolutely will. Again, he had 13 points. That was a team high 9 rebounds, by the way. And for a second-round pick, I think the Warriors picked a guy that they can kind of breed a little bit and make into what they want, which is what they've done with almost everybody they've drafted. The big 3 that they had, they drafted and made what they wanted and became superstars. And Trayce Jackson-Davis can absolutely be that. So that's what he did, and the Warriors win 130-102 over the Pelicans on Monday night on the road in New Orleans. And he talked about how he just has to always be ready. That was one of the quotes he had when they call on his name. Be ready and be prepared and just be ready to go when they call your name. Here's the great thing, though. He credited Indiana and head coach Mike Woodson. He credited Indiana, even when he was here with Archie Miller, right? He credited his time at Indiana and the things he learned in Bloomington and how they're already helping him in the NBA. He said, quote, "Coach Woodson did a great job in preparing me in the 2 years that he had me." He said, quote, "Just basically the style of offense that we ran, defensive coverages, all translated to the NBA. So it's a huge thanks to him and the Indiana family." And I don't know if you saw it. We retweeted it on our Locked On Hoosiers Twitter page. Indiana basketball and their social media team had a awesome video of him talking about Indiana and having basically a highlight of him in Indiana and then a highlight of what he did in the NBA and then a highlight at Indiana and the exact same highlight from this game in the NBA. An incredible video. Go and find it on Indiana's basketball Twitter page. Again, we retweeted it on our Locked On Hoosiers Twitter page as well, so be sure you go and find that. It was really cool. And I think you could continue to see this trend for Mike Woodson coached players because he played in the NBA. He's coached in the NBA. He knows how to win in the NBA, and he knows what it takes to be that style of player. And I think Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to be that guy. How long will it take for him to find a starting position, whether it be with Golden State or somebody else? I don't know, but it's okay. His play style will carry him through. Does he need to develop an outside shot? I don't know. I mean, he never had to do it. So maybe they decide they want him to shoot a little bit. And if he's going to learn, may as well learn in Golden State. But I was super happy to see Trayce Jackson-Davis get in. I hope he continues to be a role player for this team. And hopefully Golden State continues to be good and he can really see some significant minutes and maybe some playoff time here in 2023. Well, coming up here on Locked On Hoosiers, we're going to look at the latest bracketology and where Indiana sits right now as the season is just under a week away from the regular season beginning for the Hoosiers. Plus, we'll take a look at some of Indiana's opponents in bracketology and what all this means as we get into the season. But first, want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is a wonderful platform and just great friends of us here at Locked On Hoosiers. If you're wanting to score early this NFL season with FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's really no better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and a whole lot more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And before we get into bracketology, want to remind you, as we have throughout football season, that college football season is here and it's rolling on as the first playoff rankings were released last night. And this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live each Friday. And each Friday, Locked On will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. That, of course, includes Locked On Hoosiers. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. They do a fantastic job. Go check it out. Again, each and every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, right here on Locked On Hoosiers. Well, the latest bracketology on ESPN, as we are just about a week away from the regular season getting started in college basketball. A lot of teams in exhibition games right now. Of course, Indiana has another one coming up against Marion on Friday. But where do we sit right now in the latest bracketology, according to Joe Lunardi on ESPN? This was updated on the 24th, so about a week ago, right? And as the games get going, he will update this every single week, given the games that have happened. And I think it's important to understand that Joe Lunardi, and he has explained this a couple of times, even in his book. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. He explains that this is his predictions on what he thinks the tournament committee is going to do. And it's pretty hard to predict this in the month of November. I mean, I think we can all kind of agree that it's a little difficult to do that in November. But this is him predicting what he thinks the tournament committee is going to do based off of the results. And of course, no games have been played yet in the actual regular season. But Indiana is considered to be on the bubble this season. Going into 2023 and 2024, Indiana is considered to be on the bubble as one of the last 4 buys. And where does that put Indiana exactly? Well, it puts them as the 10 seed in the South region of the NCAA tournament. And in their little quad, their 4 teams is the 7 seed UCLA, the 10 seed Indiana, the 2 seed Tennessee, and the 15 seed Wright State, the Raiders from Wright State. The 1 seed in that bracket is Kansas. The 2 seed in that bracket, as I mentioned, is Tennessee. And the 3 seed is Gonzaga. That's tough, man. That's really tough. And will this be how it actually looks come the middle of March in Selection Sunday? No, probably not. But I'm curious on where you stand with Indiana being a 10 seed going into the season, according to Joe Lunardi. Is that too high? Is that too low, in your opinion? If you're on YouTube, drop a comment down below. I'm curious on where you stand. We've talked about the preseason polls and stuff like that, and a lot of you are kind of low on this team until you see something, right? And that's totally understandable. But where do you stand with Indiana being a 10 seed? Hit me up on Twitter. Hit us up on the Locked On Hoosiers Twitter, or you can comment on YouTube down below. I feel like 10 is a okay spot to start, right? There's not a whole lot of room to fall as a 10 seed. And if you're in those last 4 buys, that means you're one of those last few in. And you really are a bubble team right now. And I think that's where a lot of people, unfortunately, would put this Indiana team. Just because you lose guys like Trace Jackson Davis. Now, you've gone and gotten good guys in the portal. Of course, Mackenzie Mbako, the freshman. But you just don't know what this Indiana team is going to be. I think 10's a little low, and I think Indiana will be a higher seed than that come the NCAA tournament. Now, I just do. I think that Mike Woodson is doing really good things here. I think he's got the talent. I've told you about that. I think the talent is here for this Indiana team, and I think it's going to come together as the season goes on, which very well could be February and March. But I just feel like right now, I get why you would put them as a 10 seed, but I just think Indiana's going to be higher than a 10 seed. Am I crazy? Am I crazy to think that Indiana basketball, the Hoosiers, are going to be better than a 10 seed? I mean, it feels like they should be. And when you look at some of Indiana's opponents in bracketology, right? Looking at some of the opponents, and we're going to kind of look at those a little bit later and what all of this means. There's a handful of teams that Indiana's going to see this year in bracketology predicting that they make the NCAA tournament. Now, again, bracketology in November is tough. Heck, bracketology in December is tough. In January, in February. That's why whether you're looking on ESPN or you're looking on CBS Sports or wherever you're looking at these different bracketologies, that's why they update these on a weekly basis, because they're constantly changing. They're constantly changing. And at the end of the day, until Selection Sunday, they're just predictions. They're just predictions. And you never know how the season's going to play out. You never know how conference play is going to go. How about conference tournaments? You never know how those are going to pan out with automatic bids and upsets in these conference tournaments. Like, college basketball is insane, right? College basketball is absolutely nuts. And that's why these are just straight up predictions. And they're almost never right. They're never just 100% accurate. Even on Selection Sunday, these guys get them wrong. And I'm not saying anything against those guys. They get paid a whole lot more money than I do. But it's so hard to predict. And I mentioned we're going to look at all of Indiana's opponents that are in bracketology, but just some of the Big Ten schools in this bracketology. And again, this will get updated on ESPN once the games start next Monday and Tuesday. You've got Wisconsin in bracketology, of course, Indiana. You have, just so many big names from the Big Ten. And I do think it's going to be maybe a down year for Big Ten. Ohio State is on here. Illinois, of course, they're on here as a 6th seed right now. You have Maryland on here, who I think is going to be a sneaky good team as an 8 seed out of the Big Ten. And just so many teams that Indiana is going to see. Purdue, of course, they're predicted as a 1 seed right now. So lots of interesting teams. Northwestern as an 11 seed. I know they've lost a lot, but there's a team that is a bubble team right now, including Ohio State, Northwestern. Just so many. Rutgers, Michigan, all are bubble teams right now. So the Big Ten has a chance to be really stacked, or the Big Ten could be a conference that's looking from the outside in and only has 3 or 4 representatives, or could have 8 or 9 representatives. And how many times in the last, 10 years have we seen the Big Ten be competing with all these other conferences to have the most teams in the NCAA tournament? Now, as a conference, I wouldn't say the Big Ten has performed up to standards in the last couple of NCAA tournaments, but there's time for that to change. All in all, bracketology before the season starts, Indiana sits at a 10 as a 10 seed, according to Joe Lunardi on ESPN. I think that's a fair spot to start. I just think Indiana's going to grow. I think Indiana's going to climb, and I think the Hoosiers will be higher than that by the end of the season. And it may do this number right here. It may go up and down all season long, especially if the Hoosiers drop some of those early non-conference games. And if they start out slow in Big Ten play, you may see them fall out of bracketology. But I still think they will be higher than a 10 seed, but I understand the concern for the Hoosiers and for people outside looking in on Indiana basketball right now. Coming up, we're going to look at the opponents for Indiana in bracketology and why being this low in bracketology could be a good thing and how Indiana can kind of improve on that and really exceed expectations outside of Indiana fans and for everybody in college basketball. We'll talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, want to let you know about our show sponsor today is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. You cannot beat that with eBay Motors. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only. Available to U.S. customers. Well, we've talked about Indiana being a 10 seed in the latest bracketology going into the season opener against Florida Gulf Coast. But looking at some of the opponents for Indiana basketball this season and a lot of the teams that they are going to be playing, they're going to see quite a bit of these teams that are in bracketology. And you have to start with non-con play. I mean, you have to start with the teams that they are going to see in their non-conference schedule because there are a lot of them. And we know that Indiana is going to be tested early. I mean, we just know that with Kansas and Auburn, UConn, a lot of these teams that we have talked about. And how about when you look at bracketology, how about not only in the NCAA tournament, how about not only in your region, how about in your city, Wright State, a team that you, according to this bracketology, if this were released right now and the NCAA tournament was played tomorrow, if you were to beat UCLA and Wright State would pull off a massive upset, you would see one of your season opponents in the second round. It really is crazy with Wright State, who is in the NCAA tournament bracketology. Of course, UConn in bracketology. Maryland, we talked about Michigan being on the bubble. Auburn, Kansas, right? Ohio State, Rutgers, Purdue, Illinois. How many more teams could you ask for? Northwestern, Wisconsin, Michigan State. So many teams that Indiana is going to see this season are in bracketology. Will all of those teams make the NCAA tournament? Probably not, especially with so many of them being on the bubble. But what does it mean that Indiana will be playing so many teams that are predicted to be either confidently in the NCAA tournament or have a really good shot to be in the NCAA tournament or will be fighting to get into the NCAA tournament? Well, I think there are some good things here and some bad things here. We'll start with the bad things because with this, it means that they're going to have a tough schedule. And they always do playing in the Big Ten. But there's a chance where if Indiana doesn't live up to expectations, if the talent doesn't pan out for Indiana, or what if you miss on a couple of these guys in the transfer portal, or your big-time five-star freshman in Mackenzie Mbako doesn't pan out? If any of these things happen with the tough schedule that Indiana has, this could be a really rough season for the Hoosiers. I don't think it will be, but it very well could be. And so that is a bad part of playing so many good teams week in and week out. I also think there is a scare here when it comes to your health right? When it comes to your team's health coming down the stretch in Big Ten play in March and as you get closer to the NCAA tournament. When you're playing all these teams that are going to have winning records and are going to be fighting for spots in March, they play that much harder. And when teams play that much harder, you typically see guys get hurt and you get beat up and you get tired throughout a tough season. And so these things could lead to bad scenarios for Indiana down the road. You're playing tough games in non-con play. You're playing early conference games with teams that are going to be really good. And of course, at the end of the season, Indiana could be one of those teams that's fighting to get into the NCAA tournament. And all of that can lead to injuries. But here's why I think playing all those teams that I listed, right? All the teams that I just listed off that Indiana's going to play this season. Here's why I think that so many of them being in this early bracketology and being in the conversation to make the NCAA tournament in 2023 and 2024, here's why I think that's a good thing come Selection Sunday. What do everybody in the selection committee and everybody when they're building the NCAA tournament, what do they take into consideration? They take strength of schedule. What's the biggest question? Who have you played? Even bigger question, who have you beat, right? If Indiana can hold their own this season, if Indiana can hold their own against the likes of UConn and Michigan and Auburn and Kansas and Ohio State and Purdue and Illinois, right? And even Northwestern and Wisconsin and Michigan State. If Indiana can hold their own in these games, win the ones you're supposed to, and take down a couple of teams you're not supposed to, when it comes time to seed Indiana, they're not going to be a 10 seed. They'll be much higher than that, a 7, 6, maybe a 5, because of the resume that they're going to have. And that is such a big deal, especially to me. That's what I look at come March when I'm filling out my bracket, or if I'm trying to predict who's going to be in and who's going to be out. I'm looking at, okay, who have you played, right? What conference are you in? Have you played anybody in the top 25? I'm looking at you, Gonzaga. I'm looking at you. Because if a team doesn't play high-level competition all year long, you're not going to be successful in the NCAA tournament. It's just proven to be a fact. So Indiana has a chance. With all of the tough teams that they're playing, they have a chance to have a really, really strong resume. And if you can have a strong resume with some big wins, some quad 1 wins, right? We throw that term around a lot. Quad 1, quad 2 wins. That's what the committee looks at. That's how you get a good seed in the NCAA tournament. And one thing that I always say stands out more to me is, how are you looking in February and March? How are you playing in conference play? Because sure, let's say, for example, that Indiana beats UConn early on in the year. That's a great win. That's a huge win for Indiana. But the Indiana and UConn that play in the first month or two of the season, whether it be UConn, Kansas, whoever, those two teams that meet in November, December are not the same two teams that would meet in March. They're just not. Teams get better. Teams grow. Some teams get worse. I value how a team is playing in February and March, how you're playing in conference schedule, how you look in your conference tournament. I take that a lot heavier than whatever happened back in November. And where I'm going with all this as we wrap up, Indiana has a chance to play a lot of talented teams in conference play in February and in March. And Indiana very well could be fighting for their NCAA tournament lives. I don't think that's the case. I think they'll be fighting for a higher seed, but they'll be playing other teams in the exact situation. And that will give the Hoosiers and head coach Mike Woodson a good resume to build off of and a resume to present to be a high seed in the NCAA tournament. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers. I appreciate you making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Be sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hoosiers. Follow me on Twitter as well. I would love to interact with you, would love to see you and talk with you about Indiana basketball. Exhibition coming up on Friday. We will continue to preview that. We'll have some Indiana football preview as well, with Wisconsin coming to Bloomington this Saturday. Looking forward to that. And then, of course, the basketball season starts less than a week from today. So excited for that. If you're on YouTube, be sure you like and subscribe. Comment down below. If you're on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, we are free to listen to. Be sure you subscribe on those as well. Turn on notifications from when we post it each and every day. Until tomorrow, Hoosier fans, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.